What's up, Skip?
Life treating you all right?
Can't complain, man. Can't complain. In all circumstances considered.
How is pandemic life down in Birmingham these days?
It's about the same as most places in the southeast. Like as I discussed with you earlier. We're kind of got it in a good spot being at this medical based facility. We get access to a lot of things that most don't. So it's from a team standpoint, from an athletic standpoint, it's been better than most.
What kind of processes are you guys going through, like that the medical center's helping you with?
So what we get is probably the two of the best things that we get is if we need somebody to get tested, we get immediate results. Under 24 hours. Nice. Anybody that gets tested, it's right away. And then a part of these guys, whether they're quarantined or anything of that matter, or if they have a positive test, they have to sit out the 14 days. Once they get cleared, they have to go through and see a cardiologist. And so with the cardiologist, a lot of places, they're having to wait 2 to 3 weeks because most of these cardiology clinics aren't letting people come in if they've tested positive. So you have to wait till they have that one open day, and of course the line is at the roof.
Right.
So they're able to actually, where we are, they have a machine that they bring in here, and we're able to see a cardiologist immediately. So right when a guy comes back, cardiologist will come to our facility and test our guys and get them cleared or not cleared. So it's just things like that. So our return to play is a lot faster than most.
Nice. That's got to be a bit of a relief, just knowing no matter what, something's going to happen quickly as opposed to kind of being in limbo.
Sure. It helps us from a strategical standpoint, and number two, it helps our guys feel at ease because they know they can have access to testing at any time.
Makes sense. So you and I kind of quickly went back and forth on what we might want to talk about, and kind of sub a little bit on this idea of sort of data-driven coaching versus culture.
Sure.
Right. And
sure.
I'm for whatever reason, I get probably because I'm not that confident of an interviewer, right?
Right.
I was like, well, how do you summarize that? And one of the things that got me laughing a little bit ago was, so your Twitter handle, if I'm not mistaken, I can't remember, I don't think it's your Instagram handle, is Strengthzilla.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
But then there was an article that AL.com put out where they called you the strength architect.
Yeah.
Right? And I thought that was like a nice little microcosm of what we're talking about. So I'm actually curious, how did Strengthzilla come about?
Strengthzilla came about when it's back when I was in the private sector. I was a guy named Alan Belcher, was a UFC fighter that I was training, and he was rising up the ranks rapidly, man. And he got, he was fighting in some main events, and actually the last training camp I did with him, he fought Michael Bisping as a co-main event in one of the UFCs in New Jersey the same weekend as the draft. So I got to go up to the draft in New York and then spend some time with him. And, he was, and Alan has turned into this entrepreneur, more into this MMA business. And now that he's retired, and one of his things was, we got to come up with something flashy. He's pretty creative. He's like, think of a strength name, and he's like, Godzilla. How about Strengthzilla? And I was like, oh man, that's great.
It's awesome.
Yeah, the meathead in me loved it, right? So I loved it, and it just kind of stuck. And when I got out of the private industry and back into the college setting, I was like, I can't let go of that Twitter handle, man. So, that's kind of where it came from.
Gotcha. So I've got to ask, one, how do you do against Bisping? Because
it was not our night, and that's when Bisping was peaking. And let me tell you what, Alan is a tough guy, and he got a detached retina a year before and had surgery. And he was kind of back and forth with Bisping, and he was losing in the rounds. But Alan, the whole 8 years, I think his whole career, never got knocked down one time. And then in that third round, he got eye poked in that where he had the detached retina, and that ended the fight. So that essentially ended his career because it would have been his second surgery on that eye, and it was too much.
That's tough.
So yeah, but it was God, what a fun time that was training him for those years leading up to that fight.
So what was it like to transition from training a guy like that to going then back into dealing with student athletes?
It's actually great. So, not only do we have him, we had a bunch of professional athletes we were training to at the same time. We actually, all the NFL vets we had training in the off season loved to train at the same time with those MMA guys because they were always. I've had a bunch of, especially O linemen and D linemen, would ask him questions. All these MMA guys we had in there. When it came to wrestling and grappling, and a lot of that they consider that line trench warfare, hand to hand combat anyway. So they're always picking up things. Of that nature, and as to your point, to get back into training, it's still to this day, the student athletes, I have some of the UFC stuff on the wall, and it's a great, conversation piece, and especially right now with no other sports coming on, I think everybody in sports has become an MMA fan because that's the only thing on TV really.
Right. At least you can check it out.
Right, and so, it's become so popular, and I think the cool thing now is with no crowd in the stands at these MMA events watching them, you can get to actually hear these guys coaching these guys as the fight happens, and you see how much of a chess match these fights really are. And so where most people are thinking about, we're just getting there and trading punches till somebody gets knocked out. It's such a, a thinking man's game, especially on the level these guys are. So, it's a cool thing how being in that world it's such a conversation piece with these young athletes I'm dealing with now.
Did you did you ever get into the ring yourself? Like, have you ever rolled or?
I got into training big time with them. I got into doing some jiu-jitsu and wrestling, and man, I love the Muay Thai aspect. But as far as getting in there and fighting, no way, man. No, those
some guys, training aspects. But...
Yeah, I was all about the training, but as far as stepping in and actually fighting one of those guys, when those guys are on a different level, they're on a different level.
Yeah, I think it's easy to do with strength and conditioning coaches too, but it's easy to sort of dismiss fighters, right, as sort of knuckleheads, etc.
Right.
And that's, it's just, there's a spectrum, just like everything else. And it sounds like just like you described the gentleman that I've honestly spaced his name, that fought Bisping though, entrepreneur now. Sounds like a super intelligent guy.
Alan was a smart guy and kind of saw where the business was going. And man, he's doing very well for himself, as are a number of guys that I trained. And there's a couple of guys that are believe it or not, are actually about to graduate medical school, as doctors, some of these fighters. These are smart guys. A lot of them were ex-athletes, but then the new generation of guys, they're doing MMA now as opposed to sports. So, me and you, we grew up playing baseball and tackle football and basketball. These guys are growing up wrestling and jiu-jitsu. Now they're turning, 18, 19, 20 years old, and they've been doing it their whole life. So it has advanced really fast.
Oh, for sure. Well, it used to be like way back in the day, you had unlimited rounds, and it was someone who was a specialist in one particular thing, so that one of the Gracies would own somebody else, right? And you have guys with like wearing wrestling shoes. Like it was definitely a different world back then.
Sure.
Just at least speaking as a fan. So Strengthzilla, let's call it the hype side.
Yeah.
And then there's the strength architect.
Yeah.
And so, like, how do you see? To me, your story is very fascinating for a variety of ways. And it's one of those things, like, I'll see you at a conference and we'll chat for a little bit, and I'll think, I kind of wish I could just sit around and talk to that guy more, right? So, how did you, when you came into UAB, you were basically bringing the program back,
Right.
And so you had to ramp everything back up, establish culture, yet also, obviously, you were looking at data.
Yes.
In terms of starting to understand your guys, as well as then where you could take them from there. So, that's a handful.
Right.
So how did you go about balancing all of that?
So, you talk to a lot of guys, and I think probably 99% of anybody who's run a weight room for a Division I program, if you ask them, is like, should I have more scheme or more culture? Think of a team that has a better scheme or a team that has really good culture? What would you take to win? You would take culture every time, right? That now in the way that everything is so data driven now and performance based, and we have access with technology to so many different things, you have to have the the scheme part of it as much as it's the balance between that and the culture. So with us, it was creating this culture of, they said we weren't good enough. They shut you down. Nobody believes in you. You were picked last in the nation. We were picked 130th in the nation our first year. You got to have that chip on your shoulder. It's every you against the world. You got to
Us
have that
against the world always
Yeah.
plays.
Always works, and so it was easy to get these guys that we got in. At one point we had 65 junior college guys on our roster, and a lot of these guys were guys that had been, they went to junior college, they'd been kicked out of different places, or maybe were academic casualties, and so they had been told at some point you're not good enough, right? And it was easy to sell the me against the world deal, and in creating that team bond, and it was something special. At the same time, I had came from the world of, I'd really gotten into the in the business side, and I mean in the and where I had been in the private sector of dealing with these high level guys that were going for their second or third contracts, and what they were doing. And so everything, they had to be peaking at the right time. We were watching little things. These were guys that were 7 or 8 years into into being a professional athletes, whether it was baseball or basketball or football, or even some of these other guys. So data was very important to be able to have these guys peak at the right time, and what are we looking at, what are the things that, and so I had to bring that into our the college world, and this is what you're going to be based on, this is why we're doing things. So number one, creating the culture of me against the world. Number two, I want you to understand the why of what we're doing. I want you to ask questions. I want you to know. I want you to understand these things that we're going to be posting and having you look at, and that we're basing a lot of our training decisions off of as well. So it's anytime you're writing, you're trying to become with a successful strength and conditioning program, or any type of building a culture or program, whatever, it's all about balance, and it's balancing those two. But it's a constant give and take.
Yeah, I always find it fascinating. Like, occasionally, usually it's kind of behind the scenes, like someone will say to us, like, we don't want to be overly data driven. And my question back is always, like, I've never felt like it's an either or.
Right.
You know what I mean? And
right.
Just in the same ways guys get hyped about like a PR for themselves, right? Like, I mean, I'm in my 50s, and just way back in the day, it was just load. No one was right. Nintendos weren't even around then, right?
Sure.
And when you popped your best, it was a big deal, and it was still a metric. It was just a super simple one.
Right.
And so, like, for me, it's never seemed that different. Maybe I'm a weirdo for thinking of that. So, so how did you, like, one of the things we've never really talked about is, like, how did you, like, you're getting the program back, there's certain things you want in your weight room. How did you go about, like, deciding, like, that you wanted an EliteForm, or you wanted a particular GPS? Like, from that technical side, how did you go about setting up that laundry list and establishing your priorities?
Right. So, I had dealt with some VBT way early on in my career. I was very fortunate. One of my mentors was Coach Al Miller at the Atlanta Falcons. And when I was coaching as a graduate assistant in Alabama, we would go do internships with the rookie classes up there. And Coach Miller was always gracious enough to have us up there. And back then he was using Tendo units. And back then all you did was like, wow, man, look at how fast these guys move the bar. You really didn't know what it meant. You didn't know what to kind of nothing to compare it to, anything like that. All I knew is some of these guys were moving a lot of weight really fast, right?
Right.
So, I thought that was very cool, and I kind of dealt with it in different facilities on and on after that. And then, of course, catapult's starting to get big, and then we're looking at, I have a bunch of buddies that, that worked underneath me in the private sector that went on to do and work full time on at Exos and different things. So they were starting to, hey, showing me different things that they were looking at, and I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. And then we started dealing with the getting into the higher end of the private sector. We started utilizing some of this GPS and utilizing different types of picture technology, with whether it be dartfish or things of that, trying to capture shapes and things of guys running. And because we're, big part of our business preparing guys for the 40-yard dash and the combine and getting guys faster and things like that. And then you're dealing with guys from Altus, and so you're learning all these concepts. So when I got back into it, my first thing was, I definitely wanted to get into the velocity base, because I went down that wormhole. I became a big Brian Mann fan.
Easy to do. Easy to do. Both the wormhole and becoming a fan of Mann.
Absolutely. So. And believe me, when I first went down that wormhole, I was lost, buddy. I needed some help. And then, of course, we set up as and early on at UAB, they had done some calls with him with our Olympic side, and kind of some tutorial sessions, and started understanding things a little bit better. So I knew when, we were in our old facility at UAB for about, a year and a half before we built our new one, and we started putting these concepts together of things we wanted. And Coach Bill Clark, he's always wanting to be on the cutting edge. He always wanting to have that. And I said, well, I think velocity-based training is something that I want to really take a look into. And so the number one thing we said, I was selling to our coach was like, hey, we can get these guys. It's going to create competition and intent and things of this matter. And of course, he loved that, because nobody really understood, why we were trying to do this in the beginning. And so we went with the EliteForm, and we knew we wanted to use different types of GPS stuff to kind of, player load management and things of that, and volume and intensities and whatever. And, being at a research-based facility like Medical UAB, it all fit in together with what we were wanting to do. They're already doing some of those things from their standpoint. They have a great exercise fitness program here as well, and we've done some collaboration with a lot of with them over the last couple of years. But as we started using the units more and more, and I started bouncing ideas off other coaches who were starting to use EliteForm and things of that matter, and starting to see what it was really, used for, became not only a huge fan, it changed kind of the philosophy and which I was able to do things.
Well, you mentioned competition and intent, and there's another point where those things combine, right? Culture. Right, the strength architect versus Strengthzilla. I'm going to hang on to that one for a while.
Yeah.
But so, would you say that most of your guys see what pops up as just basically like a score?
Absolutely. Everything becomes a competition, and and that's what I spoke to about you earlier. It kind of in the beginning, it started to backfire a little, with some of the. So we had trained.
That's what I was hoping. That's kind of where I was hoping we would get to.
Right.
Most people don't talk about how it can backfire.
Yeah, it did. Yeah. It did. So, we spent about a year and a half of just training when we brought our program back in 2016. We didn't play football to 2017. So all we did was train for a year, right? And so we got really good at lifting. We guys, and we did it the right way. Coach Clark he didn't jump gung-ho and want to start practices right off the bat. He said, hey, let's give these guys 6 months to really become, because we had a lot of guys that had been out of football for a little while, right? Hadn't done anything. So, we really took our time and did things the right way. And so, we got our guys by the time a year and a half later, when we're starting to use these, this velocity-based training, they were a lot of them had gone from novice to elite level lifters, very proficient in what they do. And so we go in and I'm all, hell bent on being this guy on intent and competition. And sure enough, man, it's working. I mean, guys are sitting there, they're trying to hit the thing on green. They're trying to get the score. It's creating competition. We're trying to PR all the time and drive our peak power levels up, and it's great. Well, then by the time I get this next freshman class in, and they come right into it. And so what do you do? You're trying to teach them, those guys, the same thing. These guys aren't elite level lifters. They're novice lifters. So they're cheating reps and doing whatever they can, quarter squats, doing whatever they can to try to beat this score. And I said, man, we really need to rethink this thing. And so what we did is, with the intent can have a harmful effect too if you're not focusing on movement mobility, right? And
Right.
so we had to take a step back with those guys. We totally took them off the velocity in the beginning and went back in their first year in developmental group. We kind of made them like earn the velocity training. So we went back to our roots, focused on movement, focused on things, got a little bit stronger, and then introduced year 2 or year 3 or whatever, the velocity training as intent. And it's, of course, now it's worked a lot better. So, things don't always work out as you plan, and you have to kind of take a step back. But that was a big issue with us. And, one thing that we're like I spoke with you earlier about is the freshmen, a lot of freshmen, well, they get sold on this technology, right? When they come in, like, well, coach, I wanted to be able to use this technology, right? That's one of the reasons I helped sell to come to UAB is, I want to use the iPads. I want to be on this. And so one thing right now we're starting to look at is bar path, right? And so bar path is a way that we can, definitely look at things and still teach them and not have them trying to, just throw things out the window, all technique aside, just to try and beat this number, so that's worked well for us.
Well, it's one of those things where I was tempted to say it makes sense, and there's probably a better way to phrase it, but if somebody 5 racks down hits a number, I'm going to want to hit that number.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Just as a baseline, and particularly if you want guys that are competitive, right? And you want, obviously freshmen always think they're going to, I shouldn't say maybe with that sweeping of a statement, but people want to play.
Right.
And anything you can do.
Absolutely. Especially when you're posting, instead of posting top 40 times or top verticals, you're posting top, velocities of the day. You know what I mean? You're top 5 velocity by position. Newsflash, these guys are going to cheat to get in that top 5. They just want to, no matter what, I'm going to be in that top 5. So, wait a second. Let's, we're kind of getting outside of the realm of what we're trying to accomplish here. So,
if Strengthzilla, I'm having fun with it, right, has posted a leaderboard,
right?
Like, whatever you put on that leaderboard, I know means something to you.
Sure.
So that's where I want my name to be. And so, since you're looking to the right and I'm over here on the left, I might hit a quarter Scott just trying, right?
That's right. Trying
to pop a little bit more peak power. Yeah.
That's right.
I get it, but it's kind of one of those things. It's also not coach's first rodeo, so they figure those things out pretty quick. But
that's right.
It is definitely a challenge. So something you said, kind of light bulb went off. So you mentioned the fact that you had the opportunity to train people for a long time as the program was coming back, like before there were any games. Do you feel like that's in a weird way helped you in any way deal with the pandemic? Because like what's happening with a lot of coaches is their athletes are getting detrained in a way they've never been detrained before. And that seems somewhat analogous to the situation you had been in.
Right. So, when we first, I'll say, probably 95% of strength conditioning out there is plagiarism, right? So some of you've had,
I love it.
There's somebody out there that has done something that you're going to reference. It's just like if there's a case, and as being a lawyer or a doctor, you have some strange case, you're going to go back and look at, precedents that have been set before. It's the same thing with strength conditioning. You're looking at things to do, and when we brought back the program, there had never been a program that had started completely from scratch before. It was going to have a whole year off to train to head into. So we had to do a little bit of the outside the box thinking, or exploring the corners, or whatever you want to call it, to be able to, there was no set periodization. There was no macro cycle that you were going to get to follow from some great coach, or even some ideas to bounce off of. So we had to kind of think outside of the box of how we wanted to do things year 1 and 2, and transition into year 3. So that was big to be able to do that. And so, what do you know? Here goes another situation. This pandemic with COVID, where nobody in the history of athletics they stopped training for 3 months, and then all of a sudden, let's start training back, and okay, we're going to go ahead and start competition here, 3 weeks later after, boom, let's go or not. So, here's another thing outside the box thing. So we were used to that. We've had to think like that before. I think, I tell you, one of the things that, reading, I've read the book. It's funny how that time, I was reading a book at the time called Agile Periodization with, it's just a great book. And there's a lot of outside the box thinking on that. And so one of the things with us, that kind of helped me was thinking about this top down to bottom up model. So, from a top down model, you kind of have your goals and you have your timeline, and you know what's going to happen. And that's how most coaches, they know they're going to start week X. They know they're going to have X amount of weeks. They know that they're going to have to be ready at this time, and they know what games are going to play, and that doesn't change. So I'm going to base my program off of that. Or from the bottom up approach, you look at things and you start to think about what are some of the qualities I want to work on overall as an athlete, have these different things, do I want to get these guys stronger? Do I want to get these guys faster? What are weaknesses that we need to work on, and things that we need to focus on, right? And then I build my program off of that, because I'm going in kind of, it's a lot that you do in the private sector. You're kind of building this program where you really don't know when this athlete is going to leave. You don't know what the schedule is going to be. And so we took that approach going in, because we had, as things opened back up, you didn't know when we found out last week when football season was going to start, right? We found,
Right.
we're finding out week
Hey,
to
guess
week.
what?
Right, guess what? Hey, we're starting. Hey, you're not going to have a week 2. You're not going to have a week 1. There is no week 0 game. Camp is going to be extended. I guess what? We're going to fit 10 days of OTAs in here that we've never done before. So that takes out 2 weeks of your training. So if you had the top-down approach, you're like, oh my gosh, you got to throw everything out the window. But from the bottom-up approach, you were able to, be more agile with your periodization, right? You were able to pull in, okay, that's not really that big of a deal. We'll just go this way and not this way. We'll weave this way, and so it doesn't hurt you as much. And so I thought that approach really helped us to have one of our best off seasons that we've ever had this summer.
Nice. You've mentioned kind of coming in from the private sector, right? And how, like, some of the approaches that you needed to have with those athletes, you've been able to kind of apply that in a unique way.
Right.
Particularly because UAB was in a situation that really no one has ever been in before.
Sure.
But like, is that, and I know you knew Coach Clark from before.
Right.
But was that one of the intriguing things to have you come out of the private sector, like the idea of doing something no one had to do before?
Absolutely. I was in a really good place in my job in my private sector. Golly, I had almost a dream job in the private sector. I was salary based and still had some commission on the side, and had something that was very steady in a great area where my family was from, and and my wife's family lived there. And so it was one thing for me to walk into my wife one day and be like, hey, guess what? Everything's going great, but I was thinking about switching jobs here, and it's like, whoa, wait a second. And the thing that kept eating at me during this decision, I've known Bill Clark for a long time, and he's been successful everywhere, and I knew he was going to be successful here, and he was selling me on this vision. And just the idea of, if you've been in this for a long time and you get the opportunity to do something that's never been done before, it's hard to turn down. It was so intriguing, and it spoke to me. And I talked to my wife and my family about it, and they got it, and they believed in it too. And lo and behold, it's worked out great, luckily. So but everything, the vision that they had, and especially like you stated, the thing to be able to do something that's never been done before, you'll never be able to take that away from any coach on the staff, any player, or anybody that's ever been associated with the return in 2017. It was a very special time and something that all these players and coaches can always be proud of.
Well, and it's not like you guys just got your games in.
Right.
Like, I mean, you had a killer season. Was that, like, there's always a point where people kind of know, hey, we're rolling. Like, the momentum is there. Like,
Right.
where did that point hit for you guys? Because, like, all those unknowns were sort of lined up in front of you, but there had to be a point where you're like, actually, this is going to be something.
Right. We knew we had some pretty good players just through training and stuff, and some metrics that we were kind of comparing them to other players that we'd been different places and previous players that these coaches like. And you keep all those measurables. So from a measurable standpoint, everything was starting to line up, right? Heights and weights and 40 times and metrics and things. But the thing you couldn't measure is, like, these guys haven't played football in 2 years. So you didn't know. In the first couple of games in 2017, we looked like we hadn't played football in 2 or 3 years. And, I think when we got beat by Ball State in 2017, and we were, man, I tell you what, these guys and these players here have always, whenever you challenge them and ask them to rally, they've always answered the call. So after a defeat, and we ended up playing Louisiana Tech not too long after, and I tell you what, man, they've been very good in this league. It was my alma mater. I knew how good.
I was going to say, you're familiar with Louisiana Tech.
Yeah, so it's a place I played and coached at, and always great athletes, always a tough team. Had been at the top of the conference year after year. They've won 6 bowl games in a row. I mean, they're a very good program. And we ended up, taking them to the wire and blocking a kick and winning that game. And I think at that point you started to believe if you could beat them, you could play with anybody in this conference. And I think if you talk to every player and coach that's been associated in this program, it was at that point when you started to believe, and we've never looked back after that.
Nice. Yeah, there was like I try to pay attention, right, to obviously all the folks we work with and that kind of thing, but just everything you guys had going on, I paid that added bit of attention. And it's funny, that's what I was thinking of after that block.
Yeah.
Like, I remember we were talking in the office. I remember looking over at Johnny. I was like, you know what, these guys are going to get on a roll, and it's going to be fun to watch. So I was been a little curious about that. So back to culture. So
Sure.
I tried to do my homework, right? Not ask you, I probably have asked you a few of the same boring questions, but not all of them. And I came across this video of you dialed in for Halloween, right?
Yeah. Right.
So was that your idea? And
that was I cannot take credit for that. That was our sports information director, Ted Feely. Man, he's pretty good. And he asked me to do it. He asked me to do it 3 weeks out. And, it was the week after we played Southern Miss, and Southern Miss is one of our rivalries. And I said, let me tell you something, Ted, knowing Coach Clark and how serious he is, I said, if we beat Southern Miss, I'll do it. If we lose a Southern Miss, there's no way.
There's no way.
Yeah, there's no way. So, I mean, I don't know, most culture, if you lose a game around here, I mean, it's a funeral around here for 4 days and 5 days until you play the next one. And if you win, at least you've got a little leeway. And so we went ahead and did that. And that was a lot of fun. And, you get these guys, they're locked in. You've got to have some light moments every once in a while to let them know you're still human and let them know that they're still living life out there. So that was a fun one.
So so for the players, was that like kind of a big shift in seeing you like having fun like that, or
I
like
think
were
so.
some of them just flat out shocked?
I think they were shocked that we would even attempt something like that. So, you know, that was a good one. And every Halloween since then, they've kept their eye on me. So, you know.
That one's going to be hard to top, though.
Right. Yeah, we've
Yeah,
tried, but I don't think we can do it.
yeah. I sent the video to our crew, like, I don't know, maybe a half hour before we came on, and
Uh-huh.
like for whatever it's worth, we all loved it.
Oh,
It
yeah.
was
It's
awesome.
good. It's
So,
good time. Good time.
uh, so going back to more of that architect side, you mentioned bar path a second ago, and
Sure.
obviously we talked a little bit about that just like when we caught up a couple months ago. But um, can you describe for folks kind of what you're looking at with bar path on a little bit more detail? Because I know we've been when we look at EliteForm, one of the things that's been coming up is we've been teasing out finer and finer metrics in terms of velocity-based training. So like
Right.
we just
Right.
added like the time to peak metric to our
Yes.
reports, right?
Yes.
And you and I
Hmm.
talked about that, but the bar path thing is important kind of in that reverse direction like you talked about in terms of the fundamentals. But can you describe a little bit more of what you're looking at with that?
So the easiest way to explain, you know, you could break down many lists throughout here and what we look at in bar path, but the easiest way to explain it is kind of like a pool. So let's think about a high pull, even like let's think about a high pull, snatch high pull, of that matter. So if we're pulling and if we're setting up the snatch or we're setting up the clean, we're looking at, you know, different phases in the clean or the pull. So, you know, that you got your first phase, second, third, and you know, different levels of the pull. So in all, you know, in theory, that bar should keep accelerating the higher it goes, right? And that metric should keep getting higher, that peak speed. So if we find that it's dropping off in any section of the pool, let's say I'm going from 2 to 3 and my velocity is dropping, you know, something's not right. So we can break that pull down and look at where the athlete is weak, and then we can add different assistant exercises in, or maybe we can coach his technique a little bit better and focus on that section of the pool, you know, and that gets us to where, you know, the guy is getting a satisfactory lift with us. And one way to look at that is through the velocity. And so the velocity keeps increasing throughout the lifts. We know we got a pretty good lift. We can and if it's starting to break down where they're out there, we can sit back, focus, now go back and reevaluate and see if our coaching methods are working, see if our assistant exercises are working to make the way we can get the guy, move him from a novice lifter maybe to an intermediate lifter and so on, to where we can eventually get that guy into where he's using looking at the power itself, right, in the lift and the catch. But through that bar path, number one, we're looking at the velocity. I say number one, that's what we use the EliteForm for right there. And also I'm looking at the bar path itself, right? If that bar's swinging way out in front, you know, and that's something you can catch with your eye. You don't necessarily need the technology, but it's cool to go back and look at those things and see how they work.
Well, yeah, there's like something you mentioned there at the end. I always find interesting. Like occasionally, it used to happen like when we were new, it happened a lot. But occasionally, someone will think that like the goal of what we do is trying to replace coaches, which is not the case at all, right?
Right.
It's
Right.
get an enhanced, better tool.
Sure.
And there's no sense in which you're ever going to replace an experienced eye,
Right.
right?
Agree.
And so, like I always find that to be, it's not necessarily culture. Like it's not Strengthzilla versus Architect, but
right.
it feels somewhat similar in the sense of you're just not going to replace. Well, and you're the one providing culture in the room.
Right.
Like on top of that, but like are there other things where you feel that crossover more closely in terms of what can be measured versus what your experience helps you see? Because I always feel like that friction point is where we all get a bit better.
Sure. You know, with all of our coaches, we got to teach them with their eyes first, like we talked about. So if we're coaching our interns, we're coaching them how to look for things and see things. Not just, I mean, of course, they get so enamored by the technology. A lot of them, you find, especially your interns, they're staring at the iPad the whole time instead of coaching the athlete themselves, right? So it's like,
Yep.
hey, stop looking at the iPad. Don't worry about the velocity right now. Coach the athlete, coach the technique, coach the bar. Once you get to the athlete to where you think they're moving well or that technique is great, then maybe we start referencing the iPad itself and start looking at the velocity there. So, as far as a mesh point, kind of where you're talking about where things meet together, I think that once you're satisfactory with the athlete's technique and with how they're moving, and you start to apply why, what are we looking at in the velocity? And so we're starting being able to coach off the velocity right there. I think that's kind of the mesh point right there. So the technique's good, but maybe you're lacking a little bit in this part of your pool. Maybe you need to accelerate a little bit more here. Maybe here's where your catch point is a little bit too high, a little bit too low, whatever we're prescribing for that day, right? It's a power clean as opposed to a drop clean, as opposed to what are we trying to accomplish? What are we trying to do? So when you're able to combine those two things together, I think that's really is the mesh point of, do you understand enough to coach the athlete in correct technique without using any technology at all? And then are you able to take that technology and apply it and add more coaching cues after that, because you know what you're trying to accomplish a little bit better with help of the technology?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned like assistant coaches looking at the pad, because if I'm an athlete, it gets back to almost cheating the reps a little bit, right?
Right.
I can monkey around and try to get a better number, but where all of our coaching staff is going to provide a value to me as the athlete is going to be improving that number while I do it right.
Right.
Like why all that pull is proper.
Yes.
And kids aren't going to figure that out.
No.
I mean, 1%. Maybe.
Right.
So
the ones that want to be strength coaches, that's usually the ones that improve.
Right. Or the ones that actually know that they how to get to depth on a squat. Like that's my simple cliche. Like the freshmen that actually know that are always a little different in a good way.
Right.
So back to the Strengthzilla side. So so what do you do when you're not in a weight room? I guess it's not necessarily Strengthzilla, but so what when you're hanging out with family, what gives you a release or relief from being Strengthzilla or the strength architect? That's a better way to put it.
Yeah, I'm an outdoorsman. I grew up in Arkansas in a small town. My dad's from a small town in Arkansas. My mom's from a small town in Mississippi. So, I grew up outdoors, hunting, fishing, and, we've lived in Alabama the last 15 years, and we chose consciously to live about 35 minutes outside of the city of Birmingham so we could live on a little bit of land and have access to, some acreage out there and be able to get outside. So with that, spending time with my family, teaching my kids a little bit about the outdoors, how to hunt, how to fish, live off the land, things of that nature. And then getting involved in giving back to sports with my kids, So, training those kids out. My son's about to turn 11. My daughter just turned 9. My wife is an ex-college athlete. And so, just spending time with the family, watching them grow up. And then I think the biggest thing that gives me release is getting out in the woods or getting out in that water. Those are my two things right there, man. That's my jam.
So in terms of hunting, are you a bow hunter? Do you love it all?
I love it all. I mean, at my favorite is to get out and, either bow or gun hunt deer. Because that's just spent the most time with my dad doing that. I like to do. So
it's got some good memories.
You got some good memories. Pass it along to your son. You know what I mean, and your daughter. I mean, my daughter. It's not just a father-son deal. If me and my son go, my daughter's always with us. It's family. And then grew up fishing a little bit, and then my grandfather was a commercial fisherman, so I got to live down the Gulf Coast for the last 14 years, so really got into some offshore fishing. So now I'm having to gear myself
Oh, wow.
back. Yeah, gear myself back into getting back into the old catfish and brim and panfish and things of that matter. So little trend is a little bit more exciting out there in the Gulf when you fish, but still it's nothing like getting out there with your kids and being able to get on the water and spend some time with them or in the woods and just teaching them the same lessons that, my grandfathers, uncles, and fathers and mom taught to me.
So I think you said your kids are 9 and 11.
Yes.
Is that right? And so do you have two young athletes on your hands as well?
Yes, luckily I married smart, Skip, and so they've taken after their mother, so we've got a chance.
So do you I assume you try to go to whatever events you can. I'm sure it's harder in season, right, than other times. But
right.
How is sitting on the sidelines for you?
It's a lot harder than I thought it was going to be, and it might be harder for my wife than it is me. So we're constantly sitting there hitting each other, telling each other to be quiet, don't say anything, don't try and get out there and coach them because I want to let them third coach them because that's a pet peeve of mine. But it's tough, and it was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, you can't. So I probably just wanted to ask you that so I feel a little bit better about myself.
Yeah.
When you're there, you can't not see what's going on from your perspective, right? All the experience that you have, and yet you also recognize, you just got to shut up.
Right.
I'm with you on the like my wife would nudge me, look at me, whatever. And some days I was a better version of myself than others. And then a lot of it came out when we got home, right?
Sure.
Where now, hey, can I just get this off my chest or whatever? But I'm always just kind of curious. So are they playing sports you're familiar with, like that you also played or your wife played, or?
Yeah. My wife was a college softball player. Played in the SEC. She was very good. So my daughter's playing softball, and she plays basketball, and they play soccer. But I've had my son playing flag football. I didn't really want to get him into tackle till he was 12. That's when I started, just for a number of reasons, and I wanted him to try different things. But, he's begging to play tackle, and he's 11, so we're going to hold him off 1 more year. But he plays football and basketball and soccer, and they're really big soccer kids. I like them. It's a good sport for them. But, they get into I've had them in jiu-jitsu for a while, and that's probably the thing they love the most.
I think our feed paused. I didn't quite catch the end of that, but it sounds like basically they have a well-rounded sort of sport experience right now, and we could end up probably getting into the whole sports specificity thing too early. But how are you approaching that with your crew?
That I want them involved in everything that they possibly can. I want them to play multiple sports growing up, not only from a physiological standpoint. I saw that it was a big problem when I was in a private sector was early sports specification, and outside of maybe one or two outliers, I never saw it work well.
Well, and the outliers are always interesting. They're their own challenge anyway.
Right.
Like basically to become a D1 football player, you're already a bit of an outlier.
Right.
And then the idea of making the jump tightens it down even more. So,
sure.
I always find it interesting. Almost everyone sort of in our world, particularly coaches, have their kids playing all sorts of stuff.
Right.
And gaining that experience. And then you can see it in the way kids move.
Sure.
Which I always find fascinating. It's an interesting conversation, I think, as a whole. So since you bow hunt, I was talking, I don't know if you know Dan McKim at Sorinex, or at least of him, right?
Yeah.
So he was on one of these pretty early and is a hunter. and we were talking about the fact I'm a suburban kid, so total opposite end of it, right? So I went to this high school where we had it was in West Lafayette, where Purdue University is.
Yeah.
And so we had like college professor kids, but we also had like farm kids. Like it was this interesting mix. And I lived in like this neighborhood out in the country, but it was really just a neighborhood.
Yeah.
Like, and so never hunted, didn't like fishing. I just thought it was boring, right? And so when I got to college, a bunch of guys on the team were like, well, we're going to go shoot bows. And they went to one of those places where you're shooting, like, it's almost like a golf course. Like you're going around shooting targets.
Right.
And, but we would, of course, keep score. And then the winner got oatmeal cream pies, like Little Debbie oatmeal cream pies.
Yeah.
And Dan was all over that. But so here's my invitation. I would not know the first thing about actual hunting.
Yeah.
So if you could be patient enough with me, we could go do that. But I definitely think we should get out and at least shoot some on one of those courses, and we'll play for some oatmeal cream pies.
I'm in, man. I'm in all the way.
We can bring your crew, and your kids will torch me too. I'm sure I'll come in dead last. But
I tell you, I can't beat them. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, they're pretty good. Yeah, they're, like I said, I married smart, and they've got a little bit better aim than I do. But they're gifted, and it's amazing how good they can be if they wanted to.
Well, I'm with you on the married smart, because like I am like family of 4, and I am definitely 4th on the family stack rank. Like my wife's super smart, my kids are super smart, both in unique ways, and I just try to hold it together. Caboose. Right. I'm the caboose bringing it up from the back. But anything else that you wanted to cover? I feel like we've kind of had a nice, well-rounded conversation, but we have a couple extra minutes. Anything that's top of mind for you?
Not really. I think we covered most everything that I talk about. Of course, we're just, everybody's waiting on this COVID thing and see how it plays out. Hopefully we'll get to have a season. I think our country needs it. You know what I mean? I think we need football.
Well, yeah.
I think we need something to bring us back together. I think sports, football, basketball, baseball, volleyball, you name it. I think that's kind of what brings this country and the communities together, and something that everybody can agree upon, no matter, outside of political, outside of whatever. And I think we need it, and I hope we find a way to make it happen.
Well, we definitely, not to get too political, but boy, are we having a hard time talking to each other, right?
Sure.
In today's environment. And we do a great job of talking past each other.
Yep.
Instead of to each other, I will say that. And that is one thing, man, it sounds like a cliche, but I'm going to lay it out there anyway. Like, sports just breaks that down.
Yes.
Right? And so it humanizes people in a unique way. And it's funny, people that have been a part of teams, you often can kind of see it in them.
Right.
And that circles back to the value of what you're doing today, like the value of what you're teaching. Boy, I know I'm sounding like a Hallmark card, but teaching your kids, and having them involved with so many different things.
Yeah.
And I just think the value's there. So I'm totally with you. It'd be nice if we can get into a season, have some consistency to it, right? Which, it's going to be good for everybody.
Right.
Not just our little micro level, right?
Right.
But everybody as a whole. So.
Yep.
So wow, I never thought that would come out of my mouth, but.
There you go. Times are changing, aren't they? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's the thing is, if you ask me what our biggest problem is with everything, and I've had this discussion with multiple players, multiple colleagues, and I'll tell you, it's the biggest thing that I've changed with since in being a coach over the last 25 years is I don't think communication is always key in all this, right? With everything, but I think we do not listen to each other. I think we did a good job of talking. I don't think we listen. I don't think that people listen to other people and truly listen. They kind of have their opinion, and they're going to do anything they can to get their opinion across to you no matter what. So I think if everybody sat down and listened, that's something we've done better as coaches here. I know at this place is listening to our players actually. And when I bring a guy in and evaluate them and sit down and we have a 20-minute one-on-one meeting, I'm going to talk to him for about 5 minutes about things that he needs to work on. In the next 15 minutes, I'm just going to let him talk and listen to what's important to him and what's going on in his life and his family and his beliefs and what's going on. And that helps me communicate better with him. And I think if everybody did that and everybody had a common goal like you do in a locker room, then things would work, wouldn't it? You know, they sure, I don't know if they would work. I don't know if things will ever just work the way we want them, but they would certainly work a lot better.
Well, there's always going to be items that have a point of tension, right? And like that's always going to be tough. But there's so many things we could agree on if we would just listen to each other. Yes. That don't have that. It would make talking about the actual really challenging topics so much easier. But to your point, if we don't listen, we don't even give ourselves a chance to take care of the simple things.
Correct.
So, a culture, like we don't need VBT if we can't agree on culture.
Right.
That's a weird way to summarize it, but I think there's some truth behind it. So.
Right.
Well, hey, we got heavy at the end, but
we did, man. We went there.
So, yeah, why not? Someone's got to.
Right.
So might as well be us.
There you go.
In all seriousness, though, I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me, man.
I always enjoy it. Like every time we talk, I truly do enjoy it. So, yeah. So let's do a part 2 at some point.
Let's do it.
And yeah. We'll see if we can measure bar path too. So we'll look at
there
those.
You go. I'm in.
All right. I appreciate it, Coach. Have a great week.